This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie. MyBookie will match your first deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Head to mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And joining me on this episode to preview the Vanderbilt Commodores as they work their way down and come to the Swamp on Saturday is Chad Bishop, Senior Editor of Athletic Communications for Vanderbilt at VUCommodores.com, giving us a really good look at Vanderbilt and the playmakers to watch out there for in the quarterback situation as Vanderbilt comes to the Swamp as Florida's trying to bounce back after a loss to Georgia last week. Before we get to that preview, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there, as well as you can catch Gators Breakdown on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Don't forget, every week, a News4Jax exclusive, Talking with Troop, where former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me this season, only on News4Jax, and gives his thoughts on the Gators like only he can. And really want to get Ben's thoughts, of course, after the disappointing loss to Georgia last week and this Vanderbilt game coming up. Ben brings it every time, and you can catch that every week exclusively on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Chad Bishop, Senior Editor of Athletic Communications for Vanderbilt, joining me here on Gators Breakdown to preview these Vanderbilt Commodores as they come into the Swamp. Chad, thank you for joining me, man.
Absolutely. Glad to be with a fellow Georgia Southern Eagle.
Absolutely. Chad and I figured out we graduated from Georgia Southern in the year of 2006 at the same time and stuff. So I was on the TV media side of things. You were on the print media side of things. But, kind of weird that we come from the same place at the same time.
Yeah. Small world. Who knew? But, definitely excited to be talking with you.
All right, let's get into these Vanderbilt Commodores just a little bit. What's the latest at the quarterback position? Riley Neal was the starter last week. Come in, led us 11 plays, 77-yard drive to begin the game, and capped it off with a 26-yard touchdown pass, and then he never returned. So what's the latest on who may start at the quarterback position for Vanderbilt?
Yeah, it's quite the discombobulated situation for the Commodores. They, a little background, they started the year – started the offseason. They went out and got Riley Neal, a graduate transfer from Ball State. And Riley Neal put up very good numbers at Ball State in the MAC. And Vanderbilt's thinking was, we believe in his talents, we believe in his ability, and we believe with a better supporting cast on offense, he can pick up right where Kyle Shermer left off. And that never really happened early in the year. Riley Neal didn't play terrible, but he didn't play great. And the offense just really couldn't get going behind really a makeshift offensive line and the new quarterback with Riley Neal. So they threw redshirt junior Deuce Wallace into the mix a little bit, but really the same problems. They really couldn't get the offense going behind either one of them. So in comes Mo Hassan, a walk-on who originally started his career at Syracuse before going to community college. Had never, really started or played a whole lot of quarterback at Vanderbilt. He comes in and he sparks the Vandy offense, and they beat number 22 Missouri 21-14 at home. And everyone's thinking, man, this is it. This is what Vanderbilt's been looking for, a different voice in the huddle. But during the course of that Missouri game, you can Google it or search on Twitter. Mo Hassan took a real vicious helmet-to-helmet hit and knocked him out in the third quarter of that game. And that was almost a month ago at this point, and he's still not back because of that concussion on that hit. So Riley Neal comes back to the starter's role, plays at South Carolina, and that offense looked great. I mean, marched right down the field in their first offensive position. He throws a 26-yard touchdown pass to Cam Johnson. But somewhere in that series, he took a hit to the head and suffered a concussion of his own, and he didn't play the rest of the game. And, of course, the offense kind of went back to its old struggles. So now going into this week, Riley Neal and Mo Hassan still doubtful, I would say, at this point, in that concussion protocol. I mean, even if they're cleared by Tuesday or Wednesday, or even as late as Thursday, I'd be surprised if either of them makes the trip or plays. So you're down to Deuce Wallace, who we mentioned before, a Tennessee kid, a redshirt junior who did not play all of 2018, or Alan Walters, a former three-star prospect who has never played before for Vanderbilt. So it's a very tough recipe that Vanderbilt has been dealt going into this week, especially going into the Swamp against a top 10 team.
And Florida fans know all too well, no matter who's at quarterback, this offense will probably be at its best if running back Keyshawn Vaughn gets going. Great success versus Florida last year before getting injured. What kind of season has he had so far this year in this run game?
He's had a great year. I don't know if his numbers are going to end up being, top of the charts. But what's impressed me about Keyshawn Vaughn is his ability to stay on the field a lot more than he did last year, his ability to break tackles, to run over people. He is earning every yard he's gotten this year. He has 790 yards right now. I talked about the offensive line a little bit. They lost 3 starters from last year, and one of those starters was Justin School, who is now starting for the San Francisco 49ers, left tackle. And so Keyshawn Vaughn's kind of had to navigate his way around a new offensive line. And the second part of that is defenses with Vanderbilt's quarterback issues. They're stacking the box, and Keyshawn Vaughn is getting what he's getting, but they're making Vanderbilt's passing game and quarterback beat them. So it's the yards have been tough to come by for Keyshawn. I mean, he rushed for 87 at South Carolina. And he had to scratch and claw and really try to get every single inch of those yards. So, I think he'll have a good game at Florida, but that really hasn't been the issue for Vanderbilt. They need something to complement him, and they really haven't found the answers in the passing game to this point.
And speaking of that passing game, leading receiver Kalijah Lipscomb was in uniform but didn't play last week versus South Carolina. And quote from Derek Mason, just working through some things personal. Looks like he's available to go this week versus Florida.
He is, and that was a new one for me. And talking to a lot of the beat reporters on the Vanderbilt beat, they had never really seen something like that before, where a young man, goes to a game, is dressed, is in uniform, fully padded, but never plays. And the reason from the head coach is quote unquote, personal matters. And that's certainly none of our business. And whatever Kalijah was going through last week, he seems to have rectified and is a full go. Talked with the coaching staff, and he said, let's give it another try. Let's go down there in Florida, get back on the field. And he's coming off the heels of a Senior Bowl invitation this week. So I'm sure he wants to sort of, make amends for his absence last week. I mean, he's definitely Vanderbilt's number one target. Another guy that, is very physical. He has the speed at wide receiver, obviously, but he can break tackles and he can go up and make that tough catch. And Vanderbilt really, sorely needs him and tight end Jared Pinkney to get going to really have any shot, not only in this game, but for the rest of the year.
Yeah, has it surprised you, Chad, about how, of course you mentioned the quarterback issues and what's going on there, and of course it starts there, but you mentioned, Pickney and Lipscomb and Vaughn, there's 3 solid, skill players there for this Vanderbilt offense. Are you a bit surprised at how the offense has not really, I won't necessarily say taken off, but, just kind of been held at guard at points this season?
Yeah, I am. And I think, the reasons for that are probably twofold. One, we talked about Riley Neal coming in at quarterback, and he, never really took off like they had hoped. And then the second part of that is, like I mentioned, the offensive line, and everybody kind of works together. The offensive line dealt with some injuries earlier in the year. They weren't playing cohesive and consistent. That didn't give Riley Neal a lot of time to throw the ball and find those big-time playmakers in the passing game. And like we said, while Keyshawn Vaughn has got his yardage, he can't be the be-all, end-all for that offense. So it's kind of all worked together where it just has never clicked for whatever reason, whether it be whatever quarterback's in there or whatever defense they're going against. There were high expectations for this offense coming in. I mean, those guys aren't just names. Jared Pinkney in the preseason was projected to be a first-round pick as a big-time tight end. And Keyshawn Vaughn and Kalijah Lipscomb, all 3 of them came back for their senior seasons, hoping to improve their draft stock and really, put this offense on the map as maybe one of the best in Vanderbilt history. And just, it's just one of those things that it's almost unexplainable, and that's how football sort of works sometimes. Everybody's sort of scratching their heads looking for answers, and if Derek Mason and his staff had those answers, they would be way happier than they are right now. But just things have not gone their way injury-wise, and the offensive line didn't come along as quick as they had hoped, and therefore the offense has just never really put up those big numbers everyone expected. Could it happen? I don't know. I mean, it could happen Saturday at Florida, certainly. Probably not against Florida's tough defense, but maybe the following weeks against Kentucky, Tennessee, and East Tennessee State. But by that point, it may be too little too late.
Right. Chad Bishop, Senior Editor of Athletic Communications for Vanderbilt at VUCommodores.com, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Chad, this defense didn't start a senior for the third straight game last week versus South Carolina. And lately, it's a defense that's kind of been hanging tough and doing well in the red zone recently.
They've been playing great, and they took a lot of flack early on in the season. A lot of that had to do with playing Georgia and LSU and Purdue when Purdue had its full arsenal of offensive weapons before they were ravaged by injuries. They brought in a lot of grad transfers. They had some junior college guys they were counting on. Some of those guys have not played up to par, and some of those guys have been injured, and therefore there's been a ton of young guys who have stepped into the lineup. And they've grown up. They really grew up in that Missouri game. And actually, I talked to defensive coordinator Jason Tarver about this, and he said he really saw things click in the second half of a loss at home to UNLV, where he sort of saw his guys stand up and say, enough is enough. Or, we're not going to play this way anymore. We're going to start to play better defensive football. And they've done that. Unfortunately, like we talked about with the offensive issues, it's kind of been that scale where one end is up and the other end is down. So while the defense has started to play a lot better, they started to tackle a lot better. They haven't given up those big time explosive plays like they were doing earlier in the season. The offense has struggled. So therefore the defense has been on the field for a lot of snaps, a lot longer, a lot more drives, and they've worn down. I mean, that South Carolina game last week, they had a goal line stand. They had a fumble inside the 10-yard line that they recovered. They made some big defensive plays to keep Vanderbilt's offense and Vanderbilt as a team in the game. They just couldn't sustain it for 4 quarters. So I'd expect them to keep getting better. I mean, they're a very young team. They got a lot of young guys on that side of the ball who are not tired at all, and that they're becoming more aggressive and attacking a lot more. And I've liked what I've seen out of them recently the last few games.
And if this Florida offense is to have success, where do the Gators need to attack this Commodore defense?
That's a good question. I think Vanderbilt's done a pretty good job on run defense, but I think, what we saw last week at South Carolina was the Gamecocks were able in the second half to start to pick up big chunks of yardage in the ground game, and that really opened the passing game. So I would expect Florida to try to run the ball, and if you see the Gators get 4, 5, 6 yards on the ground early, I think that's going to open things in the passing game. Not that Vanderbilt's secondary, is the worst in the world, but they can be exploited if Florida is able to establish that run. I know that probably sounds elementary football, but that's really been the recipe against this Vanderbilt defense. If you're watching Florida on Saturday and they're not able to get a whole lot in the run game, I think that bodes well for Vanderbilt, because that defense will be able to adjust and they'll be able to bring pressure on third downs and second and longs. And that's something they need to do, because they got some guys who can rush the passer, like LaShawn Polino-Bell, a junior college transfer, who's been great at getting in the backfield, and Elijah McAllister, who's really come on at linebacker. So it's really, pretty elementary, like a lot of defenses. If Vanderbilt's able to get up there and stop that run, they'll be able to sit back and really guard the pass. But if Florida wants to have success, I think it really starts up front with opening some holes, getting some big chunks on the ground game, and that'll open things downfield in the passing game and later downs and possessions.
Yeah, the running game's been an issue for Florida this year. So, I think I may look for Florida early on to try, to pass the ball, soften up this Vanderbilt defense a little bit as far as spreading them out with the passing game, and then try and get the run game going. But as you said, with what Vanderbilt did last week versus South Carolina, it will be interesting to see how Florida comes out and how they attack Vanderbilt, because they have struggled mightily, of course, last week versus Georgia as well, in establishing any kind of a run game. So, who knows what they see on tape and how they choose to attack it to begin with.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's always adjustments, right, week to week, and that's a good point you bring up because I thought that's what South Carolina tried to do a little bit against Vanderbilt's defense is really throw it early and often in the first half, and it didn't really work out honestly, and it wasn't until the second half when Vanderbilt's defense started to sort of tire and wear down that South Carolina all of a sudden was running for 5, 6, 7 yards a clip and really eating the clock and controlling possession, and then we're able to throw the ball down the field to South Carolina's receiver Edwards, who just had a monster game. So, yeah, I mean, what game plan Florida comes out with, how Vanderbilt's able to adjust to all that. To me, it's really the way that Vanderbilt's going to be able to have to win games the rest of the year is have that defense play lights out and keep Vanderbilt's offense in the game, give them a chance to score with maybe short fields or turnovers, and hope the other team makes a mistake because right now with Vanderbilt's quarterback issues, they're really searching for things on that side of the ball.
All right, last thought, Chad, before I let you go here. What's the thoughts and talk about Derek Mason right now? Of course, you said Vanderbilt not really, maybe not living up to quite the look or expectation many thought coming into this season, but did get that big win versus Missouri a couple games ago. So what's the thoughts and all that good stuff about Derek Mason right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that I would watch for, SEC college football fans is Malcolm Turner is the new athletic director at Vanderbilt. And he's only been there about a year, a little more, a little less. And so it's going to be interesting to see, what direction he takes this football program. I think Derek Mason has Malcolm Turner's full support, and Malcolm Turner has gone on record and say, a lot of people are real harsh on Derek Mason right now, but is Vanderbilt as an athletics program giving Derek Mason the tools to win, the resources, the money, the budget, the facilities? Maybe Vanderbilt should look at that first before they look at, the results on the football field with their football coach. And I think Malcolm Turner has come in and sort of surveyed, all the issues at work here, whether it's simply the players, in the locker room or the coaching staff or the stadium and how that all kind of works together and what direction this program needs to go. I don't think it's a be all end all that the football coach Derek Mason's record is going to be this and therefore he won't be back next year. I think it's going to be a lot of factors moving forward on, what Vanderbilt can do to help him succeed. And if Malcolm Turner thinks he's the right guy to do that, I don't think there's any question that everybody knows Derek Mason is a very good football coach and probably an even better man when it comes to, getting guys their education and getting them, out of Vanderbilt and into the professional world and creating, very fine, upstanding young men. So I think the question for Malcolm Turner and Vanderbilt Athletics is what can we do to help him succeed moving forward? Is he the guy we want moving forward? And let's try to kind of take all these factors in the off season and see where we can go and where we can go.
All right, that's the Vanderbilt preview from Chad Bishop, Senior Editor of Athletic Communications for Vanderbilt at VUCommodores.com. Chad, man, and I can't thank you enough. Great look into Vanderbilt and this team that's coming into the Swamp on Saturday.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you guys this weekend.
Are you the type of fan that knows football so well that you could choose any game and call it? Well, MyBookie is the place for you because they let you turn all your sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. Between football season, NBA, the start of college basketball season, it's time to get off the sideline and get in on the action with MyBookie. If you're the one who likes to bet a little to win a lot, then try a parlay. Pick your locks for the week, put them together in one parlay bet, and when they all come through, the rewards will be huge. Tired of watching the games from the couch with nothing to gain? MyBookie wants to get your mind off everything else and get in the game. So right now, MyBookie will match your deposit by 50%, all the way up to $1,000. Use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today at mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.ag. And don't forget to use the promo code Gators when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. So as we heard, looks like Deuce Wallace is going to start at quarterback for the Vanderbilt Commodores. And it's going to be tough for the Commodores to generate enough offense to win this game over Florida. When Deuce came in to spell Riley Neal last week, Vanderbilt just couldn't get anything going versus South Carolina. Commodores finished with just 189 yards of total offense, 77 came on the first drive with Neal, and 87 of those total yards came from star running back Keyshawn Vaughn. Wallace finished 8 of 17 passing for 30 yards and threw 2 interceptions. Commodores also finished just 3 of 11 on third down. 3 of 11 on third down. So now I expect it to be a bit better this week since they can now kind of build a game plan around the issues, but I don't think it's going to get too much better. And the Gators will need to replicate the run defense success they showed last week versus Georgia, and that's going to be more about want to than anything else. I mean, yeah, I know Keyshawn Vaughn killed Florida last season, 7 carries, 56 yards, and 1 reception for a 75-yard touchdown. So, 8 yards a carry and 1 big play in the passing game, and all that was before he got injured in the game. So, Gators defense must be ready to show up and play a physical game. And just some highlights here on Vaughn. He led the Vanderbilt attack last week against South Carolina, 98 all-purpose yards, 87 rushing on 20 carries, 11 receiving on 2 catches. And then 176 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns in the victory over Missouri a couple games ago. So second touchdown against Missouri came on a 61-yard reception, the second longest of his career, his longest being versus Florida last season. Since the 2018 season, the beginning of last year, Vaughn has scored 7 touchdowns of 60-plus yards. That's the most among active FBS players. So an explosive player here, as we know. So Vaughn has 790 rushing yards. That's 4th in the SEC. 6 touchdowns. That's tied for 7th in the SEC on 151 carries this year. And his longest carry is a 52-yarder against LSU. So pretty simple. Stop Vaughn, and then a victory should be easy to come by. This is the 115th ranked total offense in college football. Commodores have had to pass more than they've wanted to because of playing from behind, especially early on in the season. So hopefully that leads to some favorable situations for Grantham as long as this defense can stop the run. We know the Florida defense lives off turnovers, and if they don't get them, then games can tend to be pretty close. Vanderbilt takes care of the ball. They share the SEC lead, and they're ranked 4th nationally with only 2 fumbles lost. Commodore's offense has just 4 fumbles, and 4 fumbles total, only losing 2 of those, but 4 fumbles on the year, matching Alabama, Oregon State, Texas State as the lowest totals in college football. The team's 9 turnovers lost is 4th in the conference and 21st in the NCAA. So they don't kill themselves, and that's one thing I'll be looking for to see if this Gators defense can force some turnovers after not getting versus Georgia last week. Now, this Vanderbilt defense does some good things, but overall it's not a great defense. 114th in total defense. And the Gators should be able to have a nice day on offense in the Swamp. And 107th rush defense Vanderbilt has, 98th pass defense. So this is a game where Kyle Trask should shine, and maybe a chance where the Florida run game could get going as well. Vanderbilt plays a little bit more man coverage and not really having the talent to do so, but that's just the style they play. And that should set up for this Florida passing game to take off pretty early. We discussed it with Chad, but that's kind of where I see this Florida offense coming in. It's coming in, passing the ball, and kind of get off to a lead early. I look for Mullen to dial up some plays early on in the game and try and build a lead. Vanderbilt isn't going to be able to cover these Florida receivers, I think, man-to-man. So I look for this offense to start pretty pass-heavy, get up a couple scores, and then try to get into a groove with the run game. This Vanderbilt defense is, it's not a defense that creates a lot of havoc on the season. Only 14 sacks on the season. That's good for 112th in the country. Only have 11 tackles for loss, which also isn't pretty, coming in at 101st there. So, we'll see what this Florida offensive line can bring to the table. Chris Bleish no longer with the team, so now Florida needs to figure out a rotation moving forward. Richard Garage will see more playing time now. Probably start at left guard while Hagee moves over to right guard. And hopefully we get to see Ethan White get some reps, as offensive line coach John Hevesy mentioned. He'll be the next player up in the rotation. So I look for Florida to pass, to set up the run, and then let this run game work out some kinks, figure out this offensive line rotation. It may not be pretty, probably won't be pretty at times, but it's something that can be worked on in this game if the Gators can build an early lead. Can the offensive line fire away against a run defense that gives has gotten hammered for over 200 yards or more in 3 of the last 4 games. So Vanderbilt had an impressive showing versus Missouri a couple games ago when the defense registered a season best in points, allowing 14, total yards allowed 293, and yards per play at 4.4, and yards per pass at 5.4. But that game seems to be more of an outlier than the norm. A couple players to watch here for Vanderbilt on the defensive side of the ball. Safety Tay Daly established career highs with 12 solo stops and 16 tackles against South Carolina last week, marked the team's highest tackle totals this year, and Daly posted his first career performance of double-digit tackles in Vanderbilt's recent win over Missouri 2 games ago. So he's coming into this game playing pretty well. Also, linebacker Dimitri Moore put together his 3rd straight double-digit tackle effort last week at South Carolina, finishing with 11 tackles. Also matched his career high with 9 solo tackles. So a couple players there to keep an eye on that are playing around the ball a good bit for this Vanderbilt defense. So maybe this is a game where Florida can get up quick, get the noon crowd into the game coming off the loss versus Georgia. Fan base needs something to cheer about, and need something to cheer about early. This can't be like last year where the team comes out stagnant and flat. This offense will need to produce early to get the crowd into it, and I think help themselves get into the game as well. Come out with some fireworks, get everyone interested, and then coast from there. This doesn't need to be a game where you let Vanderbilt hang around. The practices will be tough this week, and I know it'll be tough for the players to get over last week, but what happened last year after losing to Georgia can't happen again, like last year versus Missouri. So all that said, I'm going to predict a 34-10 Gators victory. Vanderbilt is just a really bad team and probably the perfect remedy for a Gators team that's hurting right now. Kyle Trask will have a big game early, and then I think we do see Emory Jones get a good bit of playing time and this run game gets to work. As for the defense, this isn't Jake Fromm or Joe Burrow out there at quarterback. Nothing against Deuce Wallace, but he's not ready to beat this Florida defense. I know we're a little down about the defense from last week, but this is where Grantham excels in facing quarterbacks like this and quarterbacks that don't really have a lot of talent, not a lot of experience. So some players will need to step up and fill in for Amari Burney and Jeremiah Moon being out, but this really shouldn't matter versus Vanderbilt. Stop Vaughn, and the Gators win this game. So take a look around the SEC and other games of notes before we go here on Gators Breakdown. And Western Kentucky visits Arkansas. Not much to look at there, but that game is at noon, the same time as Vanderbilt in Florida. Then the game of the week, LSU and Alabama, number 2 versus number 3. They're in the college football playoff rankings, so 3:30. So we head out of the swamp, and I'm sure people will get to a radio or get to a TV pretty fast to check out basically the de facto SEC West. It's for the lead in the SEC West. We'll see. The winner of that game more than likely wins the SEC West, but some tough games coming up for both teams. New Mexico State visits Ole Miss. Appalachian State visits South Carolina. Then at 7 o'clock, Missouri visits Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, that's another reason Florida needs to play well versus Vanderbilt. You just never know what's going to happen here. With Georgia having Missouri, Auburn, Texas A&M in the next 3 games. So, Florida there's still maybe some more to play for than you think right now. But we'll see how Georgia responds after beating Florida last week. And then at 7:30, Tennessee and Kentucky. And then the ACC, Florida State visits Boston College without Willie Taggart as he gets fired this past week, and Louisville visits Miami. So everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown as we took a look at the Vanderbilt Commodores, and Gators need to bounce back. It's a chance to bounce back before Gators travel to Missouri next week. So hopefully a good showing in the swamp. Only 2 more home games. There. So show up in the swamp, cheer on your Gators. I know it's a noon start, and not a lot of people were big fans of noon starts. I'm not one of them, but go out there, support the team, and not too many chances to do it this year. So I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.